Welcome to WeAndOur Caffeine. Curiosity caffeinated.
If you asked the average person about Greenland just a few years ago, what would they say?
Right.
Probably something about Vikings, maybe that huge distorted shape on a school map.
Or just that it's remote, a big block of ice at the top of the world.
Exactly. It was frozen, it was quiet, and it was definitely not on anyone's global hot list.
It was essentially a geopolitical footnote, a kind of relic of Cold War geography held securely by a quiet NATO ally.
Yeah.
Its whole defining characteristic was just inaccessibility.
Right. And that's what makes what's happening now so compelling. Because suddenly we have high-level diplomats scrambling. We had a U.S. president completely fixated on buying it.
I mean, calling it a large real estate deal, it's just incredible.
It's unbelievable. And now you had these global powers, the U.S., China, Russia, all treating this massive frozen island like it's the single key to controlling the future of the Arctic.
And what's truly fascinating here is how quickly two massive non-military forces can redraw the map of global priorities.
What are those?
Well, environmental change and resource scarcity. Greenland went from being remote and, strategically static to being absolutely essential in the span of, a single decade?
Right.
The game has completely changed because the ice has melted. It's that simple.
Okay, so let's unpack this for you. Our mission for this deep dive is to really synthesize the source material on why Greenland, which is the least densely populated region on Earth, has suddenly become the white-hot center of this major geopolitical competition.
Yeah.
We need to get into the weeds on the stakes for the U.S., for China, for Russia, and I think most importantly, understand what all this intense focus means for Denmark and for the 57,000 Greenlandic people themselves.
Before we dive into that high-stakes chess game, we absolutely have to get an initial snapshot of Greenland.
Yeah.
Because the sheer scale of the place and the population paradox, that's essential context. When you're talking about global influence, size matters, but so does density.
Absolutely. So let's satisfy the map enthusiasts right away. Greenland is the world's largest island that isn't considered a continent.
Right.
Which means when you see it on that classic Mercator projection map, it looks gargantuan.
Like it's bigger than Africa.
It looks like it could swallow South America whole.
Oh.
But even when you take away that exaggeration near the pole, it is legitimately massive.
It is. The sources give a really striking comparison. Greenland covers about 836,300 square miles.
Okay, so what does that mean in real terms?
To give you some real-world perspective, that is roughly the size of Mexico.
Wow.
Mexico clocks in at around 761,000 square miles. So we're talking about a continent-sized island.
But here's the population paradox that you mentioned.
Right.
And this is what makes that size comparison so startling and really defines the whole geopolitical challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Mexico has a population of about 128 million people.
Right.
Greenland.
It's tiny.
Only about 57,000 souls live there, scattered along the ice-free coasts, which makes it, officially, the least densely populated region in the entire world.
An enormous island with a tiny and some would say vulnerable population.
And its political status just adds another layer of complexity to everything.
It really does. Physiographically, it is firmly in North America. It sits on the North American tectonic plate right between the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans.
But politically?
Politically, it's a constituent country of the Kingdom of Denmark, a European power.
So it's geographically American, but politically European.
Exactly. It even holds 2 seats in the Danish parliament, the Folketing. And this peculiar status, North American geography, European political control, is the foundation upon which this entire competition is built.
So you have this strange, massive, empty, yet strategically critical piece of territory owned by a small European country that suddenly becomes the target.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us directly to the moment the world really started paying attention, the 2019 flashpoint.
We have to start with that public offer made by the U.S. president in 2019. This wasn't some, subtle diplomatic inquiry.
No.
It was a very public fixation. He was quoted describing the effort to acquire Greenland from Denmark as essentially a large real estate deal.
And the sources detailing the conversation around this offer, they make it really clear that the rationale wasn't economic, or at least not purely economic. It was all framed as urgent national security.
That's right. The argument they put forward was essentially preemptive. The sources indicate that concern was rooted in this perception that Denmark couldn't control the territory effectively.
They thought Denmark was too weak to hold it.
The claim was that Russian and Chinese ships are all over the place. in the Arctic waters around Greenland. And that led to this explicit fear that Russia or China will take over Greenland.
So that framing immediately transforms the whole discussion from a real estate transaction into a defensive military necessity for the U.S.
And some people within the U.S. political structure really leaned into this idea. We see in the material that a Florida Republican congressman, Randy Fine, he even introduced a symbolic bill.
I remember this.
The Greenland Annexation and Statehood Act.
With the goal of making it the 51st state.
The 51st state. Now, this was always unlikely to pass, but it shows you how seriously the idea of U.S. ownership was being considered within specific political circles in Washington.
But the reaction from Copenhagen and GIUK, that's the capital of Greenland, it was immediate, it was unified, and it was absolutely definitive.
Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, she responded so firmly. She said a line that became globally famous.
Let's hear it.
Greenland is not for sale. Greenland is not Danish. Greenland belongs to Greenland.
Greenland is not Danish. That's a powerful statement from the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Denmark.
It is. She was explicitly acknowledging Greenland's semi-autonomous status.
And she also said she strongly hoped the whole proposal wasn't serious.
It couldn't have been a clearer diplomatic dismissal.
And Greenland's own Prime Minister at the time, Kim Kielsen, he echoed that refusal.
He did. He confirmed the island cannot be sold. But, and this is critical, he immediately followed up with a geopolitical signal.
It was.
He said Greenland is open for trade and cooperation with other countries, including the United States.
Ah, so that shift in language is essential.
Yeah.
They weren't rejecting the U.S.
No.
They were rejecting the colonial ownership model.
Right.
They were saying, we are a partner, not a piece of property.
Exactly. And the fallout was pretty significant. The sources point to this deep irony. The U.S., a key NATO ally, suddenly became perceived as the greatest threat to Danish unity.
Not Russia or China.
Not Russia or China, the very nations the U.S. was supposedly trying to defend against. It created a major diplomatic rift. It resulted in a presidential trip being canceled.
I remember that.
Purely because of the island's perceived strategic value and, frankly, the way the offer was made.
It really felt like an explosive return to 19th century geopolitics being played out in the 21st century. But to truly understand why the U.S. was willing to risk that kind of diplomatic blow-up for this purchase, we have to look past the political flare-up and analyze the cold, hard geography.
Location, location, location.
That's it.
The strategic importance of Greenland is fundamentally about its location. It's been aptly described as a giant, unsinkable aircraft carrier sitting in an amazing position.
That analogy holds up perfectly when you look at a map, especially a polar projection map. Greenland is geographically situated right between the continental U.S., Canada, the European Union, and Russia.
And more than that, it sits on the shortest air and maritime route between the European part of Russia and the U.S.
So it's the ultimate geographic buffer and surveillance platform.
And this position makes it a perpetual checkpoint for naval movements. And nowhere is that more historically and currently relevant than in the area known as the GIUK Gap.
Okay, let's unpack the GIUK Gap thoroughly. This is a term from the Cold War, but it's still defining modern naval strategy in the Atlantic.
It is. GIUK stands for Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom.
Okay.
So imagine a massive, invisible naval fence stretching from Greenland's southeastern tip through Iceland and then down to Scotland. This fence forms a crucial naval choke point that links the Arctic Ocean and the broader North Atlantic.
And why is that choke point so crucial? Specifically when we're talking about Russia.
Historically, Soviet and now Russian naval power, especially its nuclear ballistic missile submarines, they have to pass through this gap if they want to move from their major bases on the Kola Peninsula out into the open waters of the Atlantic.
So it's the only way out for their northern fleet.
Pretty much. And during the Cold War, NATO built up these extensive networks of hydrophones and sensor arrays all along the GIUK Gap.
So it functions as a bottleneck where detection and monitoring are maximized. And Greenland anchors the northwest end of that chain.
That's it. If you control Greenland, you have a vast area to deploy surveillance assets, submarines, specialized ships, air patrols, to monitor every single Russian movement attempting to project power westward.
Precisely. And while the strategic threat has shifted a bit, it's not just about ballistic missile subs anymore. The geographical necessity of controlling that passage, that remains.
It also defines military planning for air defense. During the Cold War, the U.S. established a handful of military bases and these massive radar systems across the island.
Like the distant early warning line, the D2W line.
Yes, and the purpose was very clear. create an early warning system against any potential Soviet attack coming over the North Pole. This network effectively pushed the entire North American defense line 2,000 miles north.
Which buys you crucial minutes in the event of a nuclear exchange.
Minutes that matter.
And a lot of that Cold War infrastructure was later sold back to the Greenlandic government for, like, symbolic prices.
Yeah, I think one base was sold back for $1 once the immediate Soviet threat receded.
But one core facility remains operational and is the focus of massive new investment, the Pituffik Space Base.
That is the ultimate strategic jewel. It used to be known as Thule Air Base.
Right.
And it's the northernmost U.S. military base in the world, established under a 1951 treaty with Denmark. But its mission has evolved significantly, reflecting modern geopolitical challenges.
It's not just about bombers anymore, is it? We are seeing billions of dollars poured into this one remote location.
No, the mission has dramatically broadened, which is why it's now been transferred to the U.S. Space Force. Its modern function is threefold: missile warning, missile defense, and critical space surveillance operations for both the U.S. and NATO.
So if the U.S. is spending $4 billion on a massive upgrade, is that just about monitoring Russian missiles? Or is the strategic value shifting? Is it less about the Cold War GIUK Gap and more about the future in space?
It's shifting dramatically. The $4 billion upgrade is targeting the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, or BMUWS.
Which has been there forever.
Since the 1960s. And that facility is being modernized to handle newer threats like hypersonic missiles, which travel much faster than traditional ICBMs. They require much quicker detection and calculation.
But what about the space part?
That's the other crucial piece. The high-altitude, clear environment there is ideal for tracking satellites and space debris.
So Pituffik acts as the eyes for space domain awareness in the Northern Hemisphere.
Exactly. It tracks everything from satellites to debris, ensuring the U.S. and its allies maintain awareness in an increasingly congested and contested near-Earth orbit. The modernization signals an unwavering long-term commitment to maintaining a robust military and technological presence at the gateway to the Arctic.
Regardless of whether a purchase deal ever materialized.
The U.S. presence is already cemented through these billions in investment.
So to really grasp the diplomatic tension around that 2019 purchase offer, we have to look at the long, complex, and, often uncomfortable history of control, specifically the ties between Greenland and Denmark.
This political and cultural link is ancient. We're talking over a millennium, despite the 2,000 miles of ocean that separates the two nations. It begins, like a lot of Nordic history, with the Vikings.
And it starts with a great story about crime and settlement. Eric the Red, the famed Norse explorer, was outlawed from Iceland and Norway for murder.
Right, in 982 AD.
So during his 3-year banishment, he sailed west, and he discovered the southwestern coast of Greenland.
And he found these areas that were surprisingly fertile, or at least they were ice-free, and similar to the Icelandic fords that he knew.
So when he returned to Iceland in 985 AD, he needed to persuade other people to follow him to this remote, cold territory.
And the sources highlight that he gave it the deceptively inviting name Greenland.
Which is just a genius piece of early colonial marketing, right?
Yeah.
Designed to attract settlers.
And it worked. It was a successful ploy. 25 ships set sail, though only 14 made it safely, carrying around 300 settlers.
And they established 2 major communities, the East and West settlements.
That's right. They survived for nearly 5 centuries, hunting walruses for ivory, seals, and whales for sustenance.
But we have to put this alongside the history of the indigenous inhabitants. While the Vikings' brief settlement is famous, the real history of Greenland is defined by the Inuit.
Absolutely. They make up the vast majority of the population today, about 88%, and their history stretches back much, much further.
The sources outline that the Inuit arrived in waves, starting about 4,500 years ago with the earliest known people, the Saquak culture.
Then the Dorset culture, and finally the Thule culture arriving from Alaska about 1,000 years ago.
And the Sioux culture, which is the direct ancestor of today's Greenlandic Inuit, they were far better adapted to the harsh Arctic environment than the European Vikings were.
They were, and the sources note this remarkable coincidence. The Norse settlements ultimately failed and completely vanished by the 15th century.
It's one of history's great cold cases.
It is. Why they disappeared remains a subject of intense academic debate. Was it climate change? Was it conflict with the Inuit? Over-reliance on European trade? Disease? We don't really know.
But the Inuit survived. And their descendants are the Kalalit in the west, the Tunamit in the east, and the Inuit in the north. a resilient people whose identity is really the cornerstone of the independence movement today.
And the formal relationship with Denmark really became solidified after the Norse disappeared. Greenland was a Danish colony until 1953.
And that's a crucial timeline for understanding the political feelings there today.
It is.
So can you clarify the political steps for us? What did it mean to go from colony to district and then to home rule? The sources suggest these were not minor changes.
Not at all. The shift from colony to district in 1953 was part of Denmark's post-war constitutional reforms. It meant Greenland was no longer governed by colonial law, but was technically an integral part of the Danish state.
But in practice?
In practice, many argue it remained governed by Copenhagen, and this led to decades of really heavy-handed modernization efforts that caused a lot of social upheaval.
Then came the move toward autonomy.
Yes. In 1979, the island was granted home rule. This was a massive step. It allowed the local parliament in GIUK to govern most domestic affairs, education, healthcare, resource management.
And then it went even further.
In 2009, they achieved self-government, which expanded their authority even further, including control over their own mineral resources.
So if they have self-government, what specific powers does Denmark still hold on to?
This is where the tension lies. Denmark still controls 4 major areas: foreign affairs, defense, monetary policy, so the currency and the judiciary, which includes the police and the Coast Guard. And this continued control over defense and foreign policy is precisely what justifies Denmark's role in this U.S.-China geopolitical sparring and why the U.S. had to go through Copenhagen for that purchase offer.
And speaking of that purchase, let's just revisit the fact that 2019 was actually the 3rd attempt by the U.S. to acquire this territory.
It illustrates a persistent strategic interest dating back to the height of U.S. expansionism. The first attempt was in 1867.
Which, interestingly, is the same year the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia.
Exactly, for $7.2 million. And the sources show the U.S. also offered vast amounts of cash to Denmark to buy both Greenland and Iceland. Denmark refused.
They saw no need to sell.
And the second offer came almost a century later, after a period of intense U.S. military engagement on the island. This takes us to the World War II and Cold War interlude. During World War II, when Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, the Danish ambassador in Washington acted unilaterally. He agreed to a U.S. occupation of Greenland to prevent it from falling to Germany.
An absolutely critical period.
It was. The island served as a key stopover for Allied aircraft. More than 10,000 U.S. fighters and bombers landed there on their way to Europe.
So the U.S. protected the island, essentially insulating Greenland from all the devastation that was happening in Europe.
And this period of American defense actually helped Greenland achieve a greater sense of self-reliance. It fostered a political maturity that contrasted sharply with the previous Danish rule.
So immediately after the war in 1946, the U.S., recognizing its strategic necessity, made its second secret offer.
That was the $100 million in gold offer, correct?
Exactly. $100 million in gold to purchase the island outright.
Denmark secretly rejected the offer, but as a compromise, they agreed to maintain military cooperation, which is what led to that 1951 treaty formalizing the existence of the Pacific Space Base.
So the 2019 offer wasn't a presidential whim.
Not at all. It was simply the most public and aggressive manifestation of a 150-year-old American strategic ambition.
We've covered the history and the strategy. Now we have to address the real driver of the current geopolitical scramble: climate change. What fundamentally changed the calculus for Greenland, transforming it from a static military checkpoint into this dynamic economic opportunity? The answer is simple. The ice is melting faster than anyone predicted.
Climate change is the absolute catalyst for all of this renewed global attention. The data is just stark. The Arctic is heating up 4 times faster than the rest of the planet.
4 times?
When you really process that, you realize the time scale for geopolitical action is moving 4 times faster than anyone initially estimated. As the ice retreats, new liquid oceans are literally being born where there was once frozen wasteland.
We've all seen those striking visualizations from NASA comparing the lowest ice pack points in the 1980s versus recent years.
Yeah.
The reduction is terrifying.
It is. But for many countries, this isn't just an environmental tragedy. It's an enormous, sudden economic opportunity that is completely reshaping maritime and resource strategies.
And that opportunity manifests in 2 primary ways: accessible, faster shipping routes, and access to immense, previously unreachable mineral resources.
Let's start with the shipping. The rapidly melting ice opens up these potentially transformative maritime routes that could fundamentally shift global supply chains.
We're talking about the Arctic routes, right? The Northwest Passage, the Northern Sea Route.
The Northwest Passage through Canada's archipelago, the Northern Sea Route along Russia's coast, and the emerging Transpolar Sea Route, which goes right across the now seasonally ice-free North Pole.
And these routes are incredibly valuable because they could cut shipping time between Asia and Europe by weeks.
Making them much, much shorter than the traditional route via the Suez Canal.
So if a container ship is moving goods from, say, Shanghai to Rotterdam, instead of taking that long, sometimes politically unstable route through the Middle East, they could just cut north.
Precisely. We are talking about potentially reducing voyage distances by 40%.
40%? That's huge.
Historically, these northern routes were only navigable during limited summer months and only with specialized ice-hardened vessels. But that reality is changing fast. The sources confirm that a Russian commercial vessel supported by powerful icebreakers successfully traversed the Northern Sea Route in February of 2021.
In February, in the middle of winter.
In the dead of winter. That proved that year-round access is becoming logistically possible, even if it's still expensive and challenging.
And this is why Russia is heavily investing in its icebreaker fleet, and why China is so keen on the region. The Arctic is becoming the next great maritime highway, and Greenland controls access to a significant portion of that passage.
But the second major attraction, and the one that really drives the intense focus from Washington, Beijing, and Moscow, is what's underneath the thawing ice and tundra.
The minerals?
Well, no.
What kind of wealth are we talking about here? It sounds like Greenland is sitting on a treasure chest.
Yeah. It holds what has been called, indisputably, one of the world's greatest collection of minerals in one jurisdiction.
Wow.
If you analyze the geology of the coastline, you'd find potential world-class deposits of precious metals like gold and platinum, base metals like iron, zinc, and copper.
But the big one.
And most critically for the modern global economy, rare earth elements, or REs.
Okay, let's break down the rare earth elements' significance. Why are they so vital, and why is the geopolitical race for them so intense?
REs are a group of 17 elements that are essential ingredients for almost all high-tech manufacturing. We're talking about the permanent magnets used in wind turbines and guidance systems.
Okay.
The pigments in flat-screen TVs, and the tiny components in every single cell phone, computer, and critically, electric vehicle batteries.
And the current supply chain is highly centralized, correct?
Yes. China currently holds a near monopoly controlling over 80% of the world's processing capacity for these elements.
And Greenland represents a potential way for the U.S., Europe, and their allies to break that monopoly.
To secure their own supply chain for the 21st century economy. This is why the U.S. is so invested in those exploration agreements.
However, the sources remind us that despite these immense riches, actual large-scale mining is still far on the horizon. There are significant logistical and governmental hurdles.
The logistical challenges are immense. First, the climate makes extraction expensive and difficult year-round. Second, there is a total lack of infrastructure.
Right.
There are virtually no roads linking Greenland settlements. That means every piece of equipment, every worker, and every ounce of ore has to be shipped in and out, often requiring specialized deep-sea ports that just don't exist yet.
And then there's the permafrost issue. If the ground itself is thawing, how do you build stable long-term infrastructure like mines and processing plants?
That's a massive engineering challenge. Thawing permafrost causes the land to become unstable, risking the integrity of foundations and pipelines. It raises the long-term cost of any operation exponentially.
And as a result, there are only 2 active mines right now.
Yeah. Only 2. It shows how challenging it is to move from just exploration to actual production.
And the Greenlandic government itself has shown it's willing to hit the brakes on projects that pose too much risk, even if they promise massive mineral wealth. We have a clear example of this difficulty concerning uranium.
The perfect illustration is the Kvanefjeld deposit in southern Greenland. This was potentially one of the world's largest rare earth deposits outside of China.
Right.
But the deposit was intertwined with radioactive uranium, and it was located near populated areas.
So the local political decision was a shock to international mining companies, wasn't it?
It was. In 2021, the Greenlandic government passed legislation banning uranium exploration and development. This effectively halted the Kvanefjeld project,
Sacrificing billions in potential revenue.
to prioritize public health, safety, and environmental concerns over immediate economic gain. This demonstrates a crucial point. Foreign powers can't just assume they can dictate terms. The The local government has a powerful veto based on its autonomous status.
The opening of new shipping lanes and that tantalizing possibility of breaking China's rare earth monopoly is what transformed historical U.S. interest into an urgent strategic battle.
Right.
And the U.S. alarm about Russia and China's intentions is the context for this whole escalation.
Let's break down the actions of the competing powers in the Arctic. Russia is the most established Arctic military power. Since 2005, Moscow has been systematically asserting its dominance.
How so?
They've been reopening numerous Soviet-era military bases and significantly increasing their naval power, particularly their submarine fleet, in the region.
And they're not just focused on military presence, they're also laying down territorial markers.
Correct. Russia has claimed vast tracts of the ocean territory right up to the North Pole, using UN conventions on the law of the sea to justify their claims.
And they planted a flag on the seabed, didn't they?
They did in 2007, a very symbolic move. This military buildup and their control over the Northern Sea Route, it solidifies their position as the primary Arctic power.
But what about China? Geographically, China is nowhere near the Arctic.
China is demonstrating pure geopolitical ambition. In 2018, Beijing declared itself a near-Arctic state.
Which has no legal standing.
None. But it is a powerful political statement asserting their interest in Arctic governance, resource access, and, critically, the new shipping routes.
And the growing strategic alignment between Beijing and Moscow is naturally a major concern for NATO.
Because it consolidates a formidable Sino-Russian presence in the high north.
And China has clearly laid out its economic vision with the Polar Silk Road, linking the Arctic to its massive Belt and Road initiative.
Absolutely. This road is part of China's broader effort to create economic and infrastructure links globally. They've actively invested something like $10 billion in various projects across the Nordic region, seeking a firm economic and political foothold in this newly accessible area.
So the core U.S. strategy has been twofold. Beef up its military presence, like at Pacific, and use diplomatic pressure and economic intervention to specifically block China from gaining any leverage in Greenland.
And we have two perfect case studies that show how this battle is playing out.
The first involves critical infrastructure, airports.
Right. Greenland needs larger international standard airports to develop its tourism and mining sectors and, reduce its reliance on that Danish block grant.
And China offered a seemingly attractive loan package for the upgrades.
And the catch was that the loan was contingent on using a state-controlled Chinese construction company.
This is where the U.S. Pentagon freaked out, as one source put it.
They did. The concern was explicitly articulated. This wasn't just a benign infrastructure project. If Greenland were to default on the payments, the U.S. feared China could execute a debt trap diplomacy scenario.
Seizing control of the airports.
Seizing control and then potentially repurposing them for dual civilian and military use.
That's a strong challenge to the U.S. strategic position.
Yeah.
How did the U.S. block that deal?
They applied immediate and intense diplomatic pressure on Denmark. Denmark, as the sovereign power responsible for Greenland's security, was strongly urged to intervene. And ultimately, Denmark stepped in and agreed to fund 2/3 of the airport project itself, taking on the debt and the risk.
Which effectively shut China out of this critical piece of infrastructure?
And prevented a potential strategic foothold.
So the U.S. leveraged its NATO alliance with Denmark to achieve a geopolitical goal without direct military action. The second case study involves the rare earth minerals that China desperately wants to control.
This is perhaps the clearest example of the U.S. using raw financial power to defeat a rival bid. A Chinese corporation had already secured a deal to fund a zinc and lead mine in the far north of Greenland.
And the deal was abruptly derailed. How exactly did a $650 million check from the United States block the Chinese bid?
Okay, so the mine was controlled by an Australian entity named Ironbark Zinc. The Chinese bid was focused on securing future offtake rights and providing capital. When the U.S. identified this as a strategic threat, an indirect way for China to control the mineral supply, they initiated a rapid countermove. The $650 million wasn't a simple donation. It was likely structured through a combination of strategic investments, equity acquisition, and, critically, offering financing to Ironbark's Australian owners that was contingent on canceling any deals with the Chinese corporation.
Oh, they just bought them out.
Essentially, yes. The U.S. used a massive financial incentive to buy out the mineral opportunity and ensure it remained in the hands of Western-aligned partners. They froze the Chinese company out entirely.
That is a remarkable use of economic warfare, a direct, massive financial maneuver to secure a strategic resource location.
It shows the level of resource commitment. And what's more, the sources detail that a second Chinese company also had its mining licenses revoked by the Greenlandic government, signaling that U.S. diplomatic pressure, combined with local sentiment, is successfully blocking China's attempts to gain significant leverage.
And beyond the military upgrades and financial buyouts, the U.S. is also ramping up its soft power. They reopened their consulate in GIUK in 2020.
Reopening that consulate, which had been closed since 1953, is a crucial piece of this diplomatic puzzle. It's about deepening ties and building mutual economic interests directly with the Greenlandic people.
Kind of bypassing Copenhagen to some extent.
To some extent, yes. The sources describe it as placing a physical diplomatic piece directly on the board game.
And what about economic aid?
The U.S. is offering millions of dollars in aid directly targeted at developing Greenland's non-hydrocarbon sectors, so tourism and mining. And they've also signed cooperation agreements specifically on mineral exploration with GIUK. This multifaceted approach, military, financial, and diplomatic aid, it just shows the intense resource investment the U.S. is making to ensure Greenland remains firmly aligned with the West.
Okay, so now we have to shift focus to the 57,000 residents who are navigating this intense geopolitical spotlight. Their perspective is defined by this deep tension, the balance between financial dependency on Denmark and their overwhelming nationalistic drive for sovereignty.
That dependency is the elephant in the room. Greenland currently relies so heavily on financial support from Copenhagen, they receive an annual grant of about 500 million euros.
And how crucial is that money to the day-to-day life of the island?
It is existential. That grant makes up roughly half of Greenland's entire national budget.
Half.
The sources stress that without it, Greenland would face economic collapse. We're talking impoverished native villages, severe service cuts, socially devastating economic turmoil. This dependency is precisely what gives Denmark its significant international leverage.
So Denmark, a small European nation, suddenly gets to punch above its weight internationally because it controls the strategic choke point that the U.S., China, and Russia all desperately want access to.
Absolutely. Because they fund Greenland's budget, Denmark gets a lot to say with the great powers regarding the Arctic. Any strategic cooperation agreement or foreign military presence has to be negotiated through Copenhagen, giving Denmark this disproportionate voice on the world stage.
Despite that crucial financial lifeline, the long-term overwhelming goal for many Greenlanders is full independence.
That is the political imperative. Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory with the constitutional right to declare independence via a referendum.
Which has to be called by their parliament.
That's right. And polls suggest a clear, though often fluctuating, majority of Greenlanders support this step. They view themselves as their own people, not as Danes. They feel a cultural and political divide that home rule hasn't fully bridged.
And this great power competition has, kind of inadvertently, given the Greenlandic people significant leverage in their quest for self-determination.
That is the silver lining of the melting ice. Many Greenlanders are keenly realizing how powerful we can be, noting that Denmark itself is a tiny, tiny country whose strategic importance is almost entirely derived from Greenland.
So they are seeking the best deal for their country.
They are. They're open for business and cooperation with closest friends and like-minded nations, but they are explicitly looking globally.
And that drive for independence is why they maintain representative offices in multiple capitals, the EU, Iceland, the US, and China, trying to keep their options open for cooperation.
But their biggest challenge to achieving sustainable full independence, it's purely economic stability.
Right.
Currently, their economy is dangerously reliant on fishing and that Danish block grant. They face significant challenges, including a severe lack of diversified industry and, critically, brain drain.
What do you mean by that?
Talented, educated Greenlanders often move to Denmark for better opportunities, making it difficult to staff the high-level technical and administrative roles needed for a fully sovereign state. They need mining and tourism to succeed to replace that massive Danish grant.
And that economic pressure explains why they're trying to manage foreign investment so carefully. But the sources highlight a complex local sentiment regarding foreign involvement, whether it's from the East or the West.
That complexity stems from history. While about half of Greenlanders view China's rising global power positively in a general sense, there's a deep-seated hesitation about specific Chinese investment in Greenland itself.
And the data supports this caution, right?
It does. Nearly 70% of Greenlanders oppose foreign investment from China, specifically in Greenland. And this high level of opposition is rooted in historical memory. They have deep reservations about any major power's interests, Western or Eastern, due to their fraught history with colonizers.
Which has resulted in historical and ongoing injustices.
Exactly.
Could you elaborate on those historical injustices that make them wary of Western interests, even from allies like the U.S. and Denmark?
The history of Danish control involves episodes like the forced relocation of entire villages to make way for military bases,
I've heard about this.
and a really controversial 1950s experiment where Inuit children were removed from their families and sent to Denmark to be re-educated as Danes. These events, combined with long-term socioeconomic disparities, foster a profound skepticism about the motives of any large foreign power promising economic salvation in exchange for access.
So, GIUK is trying to keep its options open, leveraging its strategic position and mineral wealth against the demands of the great powers, all while constantly navigating the complex internal political demands for sovereignty and remembering their history of being exploited.
It's an incredibly delicate position.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize everything we've covered, the story of Greenland is a stunning example of how two massive, slow-moving global forces, climate change and great power competition, can suddenly and violently transform a frozen island into a high-stakes global arena.
The melting ice transformed Greenland from a desolate, inaccessible landmass into a gateway for new, faster trade routes like the Northern Sea Route, a repository of vital resources like rare earth elements crucial for the modern industrial base.
And a critical anchor for military dominance in the Arctic.
The struggle for influence is playing out not just in military upgrades like the $4 billion going in the Pacific Space Base, but in these modern, hard-to-see battlefields.
Right. Loans, infrastructure deals, strategic financial buyouts like that $650 million check used to kill a rival mining deal, and sustained, focused diplomatic aid.
And the Greenlandic people are caught right in the middle, leveraging their immense, newly accessible geography against their essential financial dependency on Denmark and the aggressive designs of the world's superpowers. Their success or failure in building an independent, sustainable economy will define the future of the Arctic.
And this leaves us with a provocative thought for you to mull over. In a world increasingly determined by the whims of great powers and the necessity of economic stability, and given the island's clear desire for self-determination and deep historical skepticism of foreign intervention, will the 57,000 residents of Greenland ultimately get to decide their own future, or will the island simply become a pawn in the global chess game, with its fate decided in Washington, Beijing, or Moscow?